The Bartlett family moved to Florida in July 1987 when Jimmy's wife Kelly was transferred from Social Security headquarters in Baltimore to a field office in Clearwater. Bartlett resigned from his union job working for National Beer with the hope that he might be able to get hired at the brewery at Busch Gardens in Tampa. But that never panned out. I had just graduated from the University of Dayton and I had three options. I could get a job, stay in school, or move down to Florida with my parents and sponge off of them for as long as they let me. I chose door number 3. So we sold our house in Baltimore, and the three of us Yankees drove to Florida, looking forward to new adventures living as Southerners. My parents were able to build a brand new home in Tampa. The new house had an in-the-ground pool and jacuzzi and was surrounded by tropical palm trees. After growing up poor and freezing his ass off during the winters in Montreal, Bartlett thought he had died and gone to heaven. In Jimmy's mind, he was now living the life of a millionaire, no matter where he was or what he was doing, and no matter what the weather was like outside. If Jimmy spoke on the phone to anyone back in Baltimore, he always claimed to be lounging in the pool. While my mother was busting her ass at her new job, Bartlett and I spent our days exploring our new hometown. It didn't take long for my dad to learn that Tampa Bay Downs had a racetrack about 5 miles away from the house. Even when the ponies weren't running, we would watch and bet on other races that were simulcast from across the country. Once Jimmy's horse was involved in a photo finish. When they finally announced the winner after an endless wait, Bartlett started enthusiastically yelling out the names of the winning jockey while gloriously thumping his fist in the air. Pat Day! Pat Day! Pat Day! While we walked to our car in the parking lot, he kept yelling, Pat Day! Pat Day! Pat Day! I whispered, How much did you win? He said, Nothing. I came in second. Then why are you yelling Pat Day? Because we're making everyone else who's pissed and had to throw away their tickets feel like assholes. It's better to walk away looking like a winner than looking like a loser. We had a good old time exploring the various beaches, eating at the original Hooters. Bartlett even put on the Blades. There was an ice rink in Oldsmar, Florida that was about 5 miles from Jim and Kelly's new home. Jimmy's old teammate, Dave Creighton, had a golf course in Tampa, and I believe his son Adam ran the rink. They had a non-checking league for players over the age of 30. A few weeks after we moved to Florida, Bartlett put on the skates and played a game while I watched from the bleachers. Even though he was playing defense and was pushing 60, he probably scored 6 or 7 goals in the game's first 10 minutes. He was obviously not even trying, but the skill level of the other players was so poor in comparison. After the opposing team became frustrated, they started using their sticks to try to stop him, and Bartlett got sick of getting poked in the ribs, so he did what came naturally and let his fists do the talking. After several more incidents and repeated warnings by the referee, Jimmy was kicked out of the game before the end of the first period and was told never to come back. It was the last time Jimmy Bartlett ever played in a hockey game. Bartlett tried to pick up some money doing handyman work for Kelly's co-workers. Unfortunately for me, he brought me along as his helper. There was nothing in the world that I hated more than helping my dad on some project. I had the mechanical intuition of Curly from the Three Stooges, and I was completely worthless as his assistant. He would be on the ladder and he would tell me to bring him the whatchamacallit, and I'd have no idea what the hell he was talking about. And so he would have to climb down the ladder and get it himself, and then I'd have to hear him bitch about how even though I was a college guy, I had no common sense. And when he would get frustrated and he started muttering to himself because something wasn't going right, man, the profanities would start flying. And something would always go wrong. Like he was working on the car and I'd be holding the flashlight for hours in some odd position and he tried to undo the nuts or some screw. It was always stripped. Nothing was easy. While I would be holding the flashlight, my mind would then start drifting and the light would start moving. And then he would accuse me of looking up in the stars for Ringo. Or when I would spend an afternoon hand mixing cement in a wheelbarrow while my dad tried to stucco the outside of some guy's house. That was brutal. He used to tell me that I was lucky because I had a father who was mechanically inclined and he could teach me stuff. But the truth was he was right. I simply was too damn lazy. Maybe in hindsight, if I would have paid attention, I wouldn't have to pay people to do everything like I do now. But nothing made me happier than when he stopped being Mr. Fix-It. Bartlett was going to go back into hanging drywall and construction, but Kelly told him that she didn't want him to get a ball-busting, labor-intensive job in the hot Florida sun. The money didn't matter. Just get something simple and easy like being a maintenance man for an apartment complex or something. So in late 1987, Jimmy Bartlett was hired to be the pool man for the Bay Harbor Inn. There is a 10-mile bridge called the Courtney Campbell Causeway that stretches across Old Tampa Bay from Clearwater to Tampa's Rocky Point Island and to the mainland of western Tampa. The Bay Harbor Inn sits on the southern shore of Rocky Point, giving the guests romantic views of nightly sunsets over Tampa Bay. It was totally understandable why nobody in Florida knew Bartlett by his old hockey nickname, Black Bart. When he filled out the hotel's job application at the Bay Harbor Inn, he wrote down his formal legal name. But when he was interviewed by the manager, did he correct him or say, "I go by Jimmy" or "Call me Jim"? No. So from that moment on, Bartlett was known by everyone at the hotel as James. Each time Kelly asked him, "Why didn't you say something?" he would just look at her and torment her by saying, "Bond. James Bond." When she would say to her increased agitation that his explanation didn't make any sense, he would just say, "Bond. James Bond." So everybody now called him James, except for Kelly and one of the bellmen who worked at the Bay Harbor Inn named Eric. Eric was a young guy about my age who became James's closest friend at the hotel. After he read an old hockey magazine and learned about the nickname James had earlier in his career, Eric resurrected it and he always called him Rocky. To my mother's annoyance, he would call her Mrs. Rocky. James spent a career playing a kid's game as a profession with teammates a lot younger than himself, and enjoyed being the old veteran who amused the younger teammates with his funny stories and colorful personality. Eric was the latest young guy that he took under his wing. James always got along better with people younger than himself, partially because I think he was a bit intimidated by people his own age and hated formal settings where people were expected to act seriously. With younger people, he could be less formal. Plus, it fed his ego to brag about his glory days to all the young guys who were drawn to his colorful personality and amusing stories. After Eric quit the hotel in 1988, he started a company that performed employment background checks, and he and his wife bought a house across the street from Rocky and Mrs. Rocky, where he hosted his 70th birthday party in 2002. Joan Zieg bought the Bay Harbor Inn in 1977, shortly after she relocated from outside of Columbus, Ohio to Tampa with her family. Joan and her family would become some of Tampa Bay's most celebrated citizens and philanthropists, working with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Tampa, the Red Cross of Tampa, the American Cancer Society of Tampa, the St. Joseph's Hospitals Foundation in Tampa, and the Florida Orchestra. Joan also served as the Florida State Chairwoman for the Special Olympics. But Joan was more commonly known by her married name that she shared with her more famous husband, the owner of the New York Yankees, George M Steinbrenner. When George Steinbrenner bought the New York Yankees for $10 million in 1973, the Cleveland shipbuilder told the press that he was going to be a hands-off owner and would stick to building ships. Instead, Steinbrenner was destined to become the most famous and controversial owner in the history of sports and was notorious for his controlling nature and his involvement in decisions involving the players on his team. When Steinbrenner bought the team, the Yankees of Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, and Mantle had already won 20 World Series championships. However, they hadn't been in the postseason since they lost the 1964 World Series to the St. Louis Cardinals. After Oakland A's owner Charlie Finley breached his contract with star pitcher Catfish Hunter, and he was declared a free agent when he won his arbitration case, Steinbrenner signed him to a 5-year contract in 1975 worth $3.5 million, making him the highest paid player in baseball. This began the era of free agency, and it would not take long for Major League Baseball players to become multimillionaires. After being swept by the Big Red Machine in 1976, Steinbrenner signed the superstar Reggie Jackson to a multi-million-dollar deal. The self-proclaimed straw that stirred the drink earned the nickname Mr. October when the slugger led the Yankees to consecutive World Series championships in 1977 and 1978, despite the tumultuous chaos of the organization that was revealed in relief pitcher Sparky Lyle's bestseller, The Bronx Zoo. Reggie publicly feuded with many of his teammates who resented his self-aggrandizing arrogance, and he almost came to blows with the Yankees' volatile manager Billy Martin during a televised game against the Red Sox. Everyone referred to Steinbrenner as the boss. The infamous micromanager forbid all players, coaches, and male executives from having any facial hair other than their mustaches, and long hair below the collar and long sideburns. They were specifically banned. The boss was also notorious for firing anyone and everyone at the drop of a dime. The impatient Steinbrenner thought that since he outspent the other teams, it was inexcusable for the Yankees not to win the championship every year. Steinbrenner fired Yankees managers Ralph Houck, Bill Verdon, Clyde King, Yogi Berra, Dallas Green, Bucky Dent, Stump Merrill, and Buck Showalter. Managers Dick Hauser, Bob Lemon, Gene Michael, and Lou Piniella were also fired by the boss, later rehired to manage, and then fired again for a second time. And late-night talk show hosts and comedians loved the fact that Billy Martin was hired and fired as Yankee manager by Steinbrenner on 5 different occasions. After the Yankees won consecutive championships in the late 70s, the Yankees continued to spend money on superstar players like Dave Winfield and Rickey Henderson. However, after New York lost the World Series in the shortened strike year of 1981, it would be 15 long years before the team would return to the Fall Classic. All-time great first baseman Don Mattingly played his entire career with the New York Yankees. He played 14 seasons in pinstripes, collected over 2,100 hits with a career average of .307, but he never played in a World Series. By the late 1980s, the New York fans had turned on Steinbrenner. They blamed his meddling and the team's turbulent culture for the team's lack of success. On Saturday Night Live, a George Steinbrenner death watch had become a regular gag on the show. George Steinbrenner was not a New Yorker. He was a Floridian, but not originally. Originally, he was born in Ohio, but he moved to Florida in 1977 with his family. The shipbuilder closed his Ohio shipyard and he moved American shipping to Tampa in 1983. Although the Bay Harbor Inn was originally owned by his wife Joan, by the time James started working there, George was now the boss of the hotel, which eventually became affiliated with the Radisson. The hotel was adjacent to Rocky Point Road, which had some restaurants and nightclubs and a few office buildings. Most people think of the Yankees as being a New York business, but at that time, the Yankees were being run out of one of those office buildings near the hotel. George Steinbrenner's office was located at The Point in Tampa Bay. That is where he ran his empire. James quickly became more than just the pool man. As soon as he learned who owned the hotel, he metamorphosized almost overnight into Mr. Yankee. Whether he was at work or at home, James would dress from head to toe in Yankee gear. His job title changed to athletic director. James was in charge of the entire outdoors of the hotel, including the beach and the sailboats. He became the hotel's greeter, making the guests feel welcome, answering their questions, and catering to all their needs. James would tell all the guests the best places to eat and the best places to see during their stay. If they needed something, he'd take care of it. If they needed to go somewhere, he'd give them a ride. And they were always happy to tip. Because he gave Kelly his whole paycheck, his tips were his play money, perfect for betting the ponies. Back when we lived in Baltimore, there was a sportscaster named Chris Thomas who had come up with the catchphrase, "I'm out of here," years before Dennis Miller did. In 1988, he relocated to Tampa and became our WFLA local Channel 8 sports guy. Anyway, on occasion, James, Chris Thomas, and baseball legend Pete Rose would hang out and handicap the races together in the dining room at the top of the clubhouse at Tampa Bay Downs. Of course, Chris remembered James from Baltimore, but I doubt Pete remembered him from Cincinnati. After all, Pete was just a 12-year-old kid playing Little League baseball in Cincinnati when James was starring for the Cincinnati Mohawks, who he helped lead to their first of 5 consecutive International Hockey League championships in 1953. James was given a walkie-talkie, and he would have to run all sorts of errands, some of them dealing with the hotel, but a lot of them were more personal for Steinbrenner. James, they need you to pick up some carryout waiting for the boss at Malio's Steakhouse. James, GMS needs you to come to the office and pick up some papers and drop them off at the house. Then we need you to pick up Lou Piniella from the airport. Steinbrenner's office on Rocky Point had closets that were so jam-packed with merch and memorabilia that they looked like they were from the set of the show Hoarders. When Legends Field replaced the office on Rocky Point as mission control for Steinbrenner in the 1990s, James was instructed what specific items in the closets needed to be moved to Legends Field, and he was to discard the rest however he saw fit. So he kept all the cool stuff: a bunch of bats, old team photos of the Yankees, an oil painting of Reggie Jackson that he later signed, and an endless supply of Yankee hats. When James wasn't on a mission, he would just hang out with the guests by the pool, walk around the hotel, or he would be in the big shed next to the pool, which he had turned into his own little office. Inside his office, it looked like a sporting goods store, filled with plenty of Yankee hats that he used to give to the children who were staying at the hotel. However, James made them promise to wear their hats with respect like a proper Yankee. Kids weren't the only ones he disciplined about proper Yankee etiquette. Whenever James would see one of the minor league Yankees wearing a crooked ball cap, he would warn them not to let George see him that way. It was no joke. You wore the hat with pride. Although most tourists coming to Tampa Bay stayed at the hotels on the beaches in Clearwater and St. Petersburg, most of the guests at the Bay Harbor Inn in Tampa were huge sports fans. Many of the guests stayed at the hotel because they were in Florida for spring training. Fans from Cincinnati, Philadelphia, and Toronto would vacation in Tampa each year because of the Grapefruit League. The hotel was right by the Tampa airport and less than 5 miles away from the big sombrero where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played. Each year, the hotel would be filled with fans of the Chicago Bears, Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings, and Green Bay Packers who would escape the cold weather of the Rust Belt by taking an annual pilgrimage to sunny FLA each winter, planning their vacation around the team's games against the Bucs. Back in those days, there were more snowbirds at the games rooting for the away team than for Tampa Bay. It didn't take long for the guests to fall under James's spell. He would talk to the fans from Chicago about scoring his first NHL goal against Glenn Hall and playing with Bobby Hull with the Rangers in Europe. He would talk to the fans from Detroit about playing against Gordie Howe in the Stanley Cup Finals. He would entertain the guests with plenty of PG-13 and R-rated versions of his many colorful anecdotes from his glory days. The snowbirds would return year after year to the hotel, and many of them would bring James various presents from home during their annual trip to Florida. After graduating from Towson State, my buddy Mike came down to Florida in the fall of 1989 and stayed with my parents until we went back to Baltimore just before Christmas. During that time, James got him a job working at the hotel as the assistant athletic director. Mike had a great time working there. He got a picture with NFL great Roger Craig when the 49ers stayed at the hotel, and he was able to meet a young rookie for the Detroit Lions named Barry Sanders. Mike wasn't just my closest friend, he was probably my dad's closest friend as well. Mike found James's crude locker room talk especially entertaining. James would point to something far away in the bay and would say, "Mike, you see where the sailboats are out past the—" "Mr. Jim, I don't see any sailboats," Mike would say, looking out at the water. Bartlett's voice would drop to a whisper. "Don't look where I'm pointing. Look at the broad." He was referring to the sexy girl sunbathing in the foreground by the pool in a string bikini. "If it starts thundering and lightning, you gotta bring in the sailboats. Stop looking where I'm pointing. Just pretend to be looking at the sailboats. Check out the fucking beeve. I can tell she's got a big hairy beeve because her bikini is so puffy it made my dick jump. I'm looking, Mr. Jim. I'm looking." There is a bit of a misconception that George Steinbrenner was always firing people. The truth is he would get angry and tell people that they were fired, but usually he'd still keep them on the payroll. He would give them a different job title, or if he was particularly pissed at somebody, they would reassign him to an inconspicuous place so that they could avoid the boss until he cooled down. For instance, the press loved to say how often Billy Martin was fired, but at least some of the time, after he was fired as manager, Steinbrenner still kept Billy Martin on the payroll. He just reassigned him and gave him a different title like Special Consultant in charge of player personnel. Billy Martin used to hang out at the little tiki bar next to the pool at the hotel. According to James, Billy was especially nice to children. He was always signing baseballs for kids, and he used to take his time and would sign each ball very neatly instead of just scribbling it, so his autograph was easily readable. If he didn't have a baseball, he would excuse himself, take the elevator back to his room, and then would return with a fresh ball to autograph for the excited child. It did not take long for Billy Martin to quickly become friends with James. Bartlett made his debut with the New York Rangers when Billy was playing second base for Casey Stengel's Yankees, where Billy also had the reputation of being a brawler. Billy told James that if they had ever been teammates, they would have beat the shit out of everybody. Because Yankee players and other athletes used to stay at the hotel, I assumed that there would be plenty of girls hanging around, so I would visit my dad, hang out by the pool, and hope I could get lucky. I met Billy Martin at the Tiki Bar. Even though the weather was ungodly hot, I remember Billy Martin wearing a cowboy shirt and long pants with a big belt buckle, and I wondered how in the hell could he stand the heat? Billy and I talked for the longest time. I jokingly told him I would give him $20 if he told any of the girls by the pool that I played for the Yankees. He laughed and asked me if I really thought it would work. I said it couldn't hurt. We talked about a bunch of old players, and he told me stories about how great Casey Stengel was as a manager. However, when I then casually asked him what he thought about Earl Weaver, the strangest thing happened. He suddenly became completely paranoid. He wanted to know why was I asking about Earl Weaver. He accused me of being some reporter. He had completely forgot who I was. I'm James's son, I reminded him. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. There was a definite Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing going on with him. Once, Billy asked James to introduce him to one of the guests, a teenage girl who was with her family. James approached the girl's father and told them that Mr. Martin wanted to meet his daughter. The father was extremely upset and said it was not appropriate for Billy Martin to want to meet an underage girl and that it wasn't the job of the pool man to act as his pimp. James didn't think Martin was looking for jailbait. He thought he just wanted to be introduced so he could give her a signed baseball like he did for the other kids. But after Billy made various lewd comments to James about other young girls, he made sure never to introduce him ever again. According to my dad, Billy would drink all day at the Tiki Bar. He would pay one of the bellmen each morning $20 to find his car because he would forget where he left it the night before. On Christmas Day, 1989, Billy Martin was killed when his car was involved in a single-car accident. His friend Bill Reedy originally admitted to being the driver, but when he learned that Billy Martin died, he claimed that he had lied to the police to save his friend Billy from picking up a DUI. The jury didn't buy it that Billy Martin was really the driver, and they convicted him anyway. James was really upset about his death because he considered Billy Martin to be a friend, and he didn't appreciate my attempts at dark humor. 3 days before his death, James had his picture taken with Billy Martin, which is probably the last photograph taken during his life. James was always bringing home autographed baseballs. Wherever he went, he always had his Yankee bag with him. And of course, that bag always had fresh baseballs in them, and a marker and a camera. He got everybody at the hotel to sign balls. On August 24th, 1989, baseball commissioner and Pig Vomit's dad, Bart Giamatti, permanently banned Pete Rose from playing baseball. James got Bart Giamatti to sign a baseball. James also made sure to get pictures with the many celebrities he would pick up at the airport and would then often serve as their personal driver during their stay. He was able to meet stars of the golden age of television, sketch comedy legend Sid Caesar, America's greatest clown Red Skelton, and hi-ho Steve Areno, the father of late-night television himself, Steve Allen. When I was a kid, I used to watch reruns of Gomer Pyle after school with my dad. I always wondered how he had that high, surprise, surprise, surprise voice, and then would sing The Impossible Dream in that real deep voice. When James joked with Jim Nabors about it, the former sitcom star said, "Tell your son this is my normal speaking voice." My grandmother moved to Florida a few years after we did. My mother's brother Mickey had Down syndrome and lived with my Nana about 20 miles away in their new home in Newport Richey, Florida. Mickey always called my dad Bartlett, and he was easily Mickey's favorite person. Nobody could put a smile on his face the way Bartlett could. Pro wrestling was at its peak, and Mickey loved wrestling. James got pictures and autographed posters of wrestling legends like the Iron Sheik, the Big Boss Man, and Ric Flair. To be the man,
Jambalaya.
you gotta beat the man. When former NWA champion Kerry Von Erich stayed at the hotel, he accidentally left his Ray-Ban sunglasses by the pool. But because he never came back for them, I ended up with some nice sunglasses. In 1993, Kerry became the third son of Fritz Von Erich, the Iron Claw, to commit suicide. On January 17, 1990, the St. Petersburg Times reported that a partnership between George Steinbrenner and Donald Trump failed to negotiate a deal with the city of Tampa to build a hotel next to the convention center due to economic reasons. By this time, James was no longer just the athletic director for the hotel. Now he worked for Steinbrenner personally. He was now a Yankee. Steinbrenner's executive assistant, Terry Hubbard, told me that she used to drive my dad crazy. James did everything for Steinbrenner. He was the driver and bodyguard for Steinbrenner while continuing with his duties at the hotel. She described James as a real character who was always upbeat with a smile and was one of her favorite co-workers at the Yankees. Sometimes James would have to drive Terry around to buy things or to deliver documents for the boss, and they would just laugh and tell stories. She remembers the time when George got pissed and fired James. The next day, he yelled out to Terry to get James over here. She reminded the boss, "I can't. You fired him yesterday." Steinbrenner asked her, "Why do people take it personally?" James was back at work the next day. One day at the hotel, James tried to remove a suspected trespasser from the premises. He thought the man was homeless and had snuck into the pool area. However, James was mistaken. The man wasn't homeless. He was the acclaimed character actor Daniel Day-Lewis, who had just won the Academy Award for Best Actor for the film My Left Foot days earlier. After baseball commissioner Bart died, he was replaced by Fay Vincent. On July 30th, 1990, Vincent permanently banned George Steinbrenner from running the Yankees after he paid a gambler to dig up damaging information on his star outfielder Dave Winfield. Of course, James had Fay Vincent sign a ball as well. The Yankees were basically run like a family business. George and Joan Steinbrenner had 4 children, and James was involved in all of their lives. Everybody in the Steinbrenner family knew and loved James. Their oldest son, Hank, was the Yankees' heir apparent, and he was supposed to run the team during his father's suspension. But Hank's heart didn't belong to baseball. He liked soccer and auto racing better. He also preferred the sport of kings and ran his father's Kinsman Stables horse farm in Ocala. In 2005, their colt, Bellamy Road, was the betting favorite in the Kentucky Derby, but it finished a disappointing 7th to the winner, Giacomo. My dad told me that Hank was a really nice guy, but he wasn't serious about the family business. Most of the time, he would catch Hank watching porn or playing video games in his office. Once up in Ocala, Hank got hold of a tank and he spent the weekend blowing stuff up at the horse farm. Next in line were the 2 daughters, Jennifer, who was about 30, and Jessica, who was in her mid-20s. Jennifer majored in business and was a Moorhead Scholar at the University of North Carolina. According to James, Jenny was the smartest kid in the family and by all rights should have been the one to run the team. When James told her that, she said, "Not in this family." Her younger sister Jessica would eventually take over the running of Kinsman Stables from her brother Hank. George Steinbrenner was an admitted chauvinist and refused to allow his daughters to rise in the Yankees organization. Hal Steinbrenner was only 20 and was still going to college, so he couldn't run the team during Steinbrenner's suspension. In 1987, Jessica married her second husband, Joe Malloy, who was a gym teacher at a Tampa Catholic high school. Since Hank was uninterested, Hal was too young, and his daughters were both born the wrong sex, Steinbrenner instead named his son-in-law, Joe Malloy, to serve as the New York Yankees' active owner during his suspension. And Malloy didn't do a bad job. He was running the team when the Yankees drafted a kid in the 1992 Major League Baseball draft, a kid named Derek Jeter. On September 19, 1990, Phil Esposito organized an exhibition game between the Los Angeles Kings and the Pittsburgh Penguins. The game was played at the Thunderdome in St. Petersburg, the Tampa Bay Rays domed baseball stadium, now known as Tropicana Field. My dad and I went to the game where he introduced me to Tony Esposito and Scotty Bowman. The NHL took notice when more than 25,000 fans watched Pittsburgh beat Gretzky's Kings 5-3. At the time, it was the largest crowd ever to attend an NHL game. Because of the huge success of the event, less than 3 months later, Tampa Bay was awarded an expansion team. However, the new Japanese owners refused to put in their money unless Phil Esposito could find a local investor willing to ante up $1 million. The only person Espo knew in the Tampa Bay area with that kind of money was George Steinbrenner, so he made the big mistake of going to him to ask him to invest in the team. According to the former Bruin great, from that moment forward, George tried to take over. He ridiculed Espo and called him names. After Phil told George to fuck off, Steinbrenner called him the Big Billy Martin. But when they were at a board meeting with the Japanese and Steinbrenner called Esposito a fucking wop with malice in his voice, Phil packed up his bags and walked out. When he was told afterwards that George is really mad at you, Espo told him, I don't give a fuck. If they don't want to invest, I don't want that prick around us. And he didn't. The Japanese threw him out. When Esposito later wrote his autobiography, Thunder and Lightning, he claimed the publisher cut out 80 pages describing all the crap that Steinbrenner put him through out of fear of getting sued. When Steinbrenner was still involved as a possible investor, he asked James if he wanted to be the Tampa Bay Lightning's traveling secretary. My dad didn't want any position with that kind of responsibility, plus there was no way in hell he was ever going to leave Florida. He was happy with his life. Lou Piniella once said that George Steinbrenner was a great guy, unless you had to work for him. Driving around Steinbrenner and hanging out at the hotel was my dad's dream job. He loved it. I really think that he was happier working for the Yankees than he ever was playing ice hockey. Boy, he had it rough. Once James was assigned the task of playing tennis at the hotel with New York Mayor David Dinkins. Another time, James had to drive Steinbrenner to the Ted Williams Museum and Hitters Hall of Fame in Homosassa Springs, where James had to spend the day with the greatest hitter baseball had ever seen. James and Teddy Baseball chatted about how they both knew and had been friends with the trainer for the Providence Reds, George Army. Now, Ted Williams played his final game with the Boston Red Sox on September 28, 1960. James played for the Boston Bruins for the 1960-61 season, which was also the final season that James played in the NHL. Of course, Ted Williams autographed the ball for James's collection, and so did Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, and Yogi Berra. My dad always claimed that he got the ball signed for me. However, because he thought I was too irresponsible, he would always just hold on to them for me for safekeeping. One day at the hotel, James was told to report to the front desk because an FBI agent was there and wanted to speak to him. He had no idea what was going on. James was worried. What in the hell could the feds want? Well, it turned out to just be a practical joke on Black Bart, courtesy of former Clipper goaltender Jill Boisvert, who was in town on vacation. James didn't think it was funny. He hated to be teased. He could dish it out, but he couldn't take it. James stayed friends with his old teammates Jill Boisvert and Bobby Rivard, and they both came down to Tampa Bay to visit a couple of times. Steinbrenner's temper never bothered James. He really enjoyed driving George around in the big Lincoln Town car. It was normally just the two of them. Although most people walked on eggshells around the boss, James wasn't afraid of him.
I don't have a problem with him. I just see it the way it is, and that's it. Sometimes he'll get in the car and he'll tell me, I'm not in the mood for talking. I'll say, well, I'm going to tell you my story anyway. When I'm done, he wants to talk and he's asking me questions about what I told him.
George was 2 years older than James, but they were the same generation. When he wasn't working the phones or barking out orders, James and Steinbrenner would talk about baseball, hockey, and horse racing. After Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, an international coalition of nations led by President Bush began a 5-week bombardment of Iraq on January 17, 1991. 10 days later, James attended Super Bowl 25 with Steinbrenner at Tampa Stadium, where Whitney Houston sang an inspirational Star-Spangled Banner, and the Dallas Cowboys defeated the Buffalo Bills 20-19 after Buffalo's game-ending 47-yard field goal attempt went wide right. Boy, James had a terrible job. He had to work on a Sunday. On February 24th, the coalition launched a major ground assault, which quickly liberated Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. After screwing around in Florida for a couple of years, in 1991 I started law school at the University of Dayton. I wanted to go to a law school in Florida, but after my transcripts were mistakenly frozen due to a computer error concerning a dispute over a $50 housing deposit, all the slots in the Florida schools were already taken by the time everything was sorted out. I applied to transfer to Florida State, but I knew that it was almost impossible. Nobody ever transferred from one law school to another. For years, African Americans have complained about something they called white privilege. After James asked Steinbrenner if he could help, I learned that there was something more powerful than white privilege, green privilege. One night, I ended up receiving a phone call in my apartment in Dayton from the actual dean of the Florida State Law School. He told me that although he wasn't allowed to tell me officially on the record, my transfer was a done deal. I would definitely be starting my second year of law school at Florida State. I knew I was getting preferential treatment that I didn't deserve. However, a few months later, I was shocked when I received a letter from the school saying that my application was rejected. After a bit of research, I learned that Florida State's law school had changed deans, so I had to stay in Dayton. One day, George asked James, how did I like Florida State? When Steinbrenner was told that I didn't get in, he immediately summoned his secretary to dictate a letter to the university. You will never, ever, ever get another fucking dime from me again. Sincerely yours, George M Steinbrenner. According to my dad, even though Steinbrenner had a reputation of being mean, he actually had a big heart. Once when they were driving somewhere, they noticed a school bus broken down on the side of the road. George got on his phone and immediately called McDonald's and ordered food and drinks brought to the kids. No publicity or press, just a kind gesture. George Steinbrenner was also a proud supporter of first responders. He started a charitable organization called the Gold Shield Foundation that provides immediate financial support for families of Tampa Bay law enforcement officers and firefighters who are killed in the line of duty. The Gold Shield Foundation also will pay for college tuition and room and board for the children of the fallen heroes. My dad put a Gold Shield bumper sticker on my car. During the many years that I had that sticker on my car, I never received any traffic citations. In 1974, George Steinbrenner was convicted of giving illegal campaign donations when he gave 6 of his employees at American Shipping $25,000 bonuses and then instructed them to donate their bonuses to the Committee for the Re-election of President Nixon. In 1989, he was pardoned by Ronald Reagan. Nevertheless, Steinbrenner always saw himself as a super patriot. He was the vice chairman of the United States Olympic Committee and was furious after the United States won only 6 medals at the 1988 Winter Olympic Games. During George's banishment from baseball, he was appointed to a committee with the goal of improving America's performance for the upcoming Olympic Games. Under his leadership, Steinbrenner successfully pushed the Olympic Committee to make important changes that added accountability and transparency at every level, and most importantly, provided much more money to help the American athletes train. My dad gave me and my mother VIP tickets to a large fancy event at the Tampa Performing Arts Center that Steinbrenner created to honor our Olympians prior to the 1992 Summer Games in Barcelona. The large lineup of talent included New Orleans jazz legend Al Hirt and Broadway songstress Bernadette Peters. On August 24, 1992, Hurricane Andrew devastated much of South Florida. Steinbrenner and James delivered water to the disaster area in Homestead. Because of the size of the truck that they were using, James quickly realized that they would have a problem clearing some type of carport at the gas station when they were fueling up before the trip began. George was impatient and told James to get out. Steinbrenner was now going to drive. After they switched seats, the boss quickly realized that James was right when the truck's roof and the carport were both damaged when the top of the truck hit the top of the port in the gas station. Somehow, James was able to resist bursting out laughing at Steinbrenner's poor driving skills. Instead, the two of them continued the humanitarian effort and successfully completed their journey down to South Florida to help the victims of this horrible natural disaster. On September 23, 1992, female goalie Manon Room broke hockey's glass ceiling by playing in an exhibition game for the Tampa Bay Lightning against the St. Louis Blues, where she allowed 2 goals on 9 shots. On October 7th, James and Kelly attended the inaugural Tampa Bay Lightning game played in the tiny 11,000-seat Expo Hall at the Florida State Fairgrounds and watched Chris Kontos score 4 goals in the Tampa Bay Lightning's 7-3 win over the Chicago Blackhawks. George Steinbrenner's lifetime ban was lifted after 2 years by Commissioner Fay Vincent, and by the spring of 1993, he was back in charge of the Yankees. It was later revealed that Vincent originally wanted Steinbrenner suspended for 2 years, and it was Steinbrenner who actually wanted the lifetime ban. Steinbrenner wanted to run the Olympic Committee, but he couldn't as long as he was suspended. He found the loophole by accepting the permanent ban. Once the Olympics were over, he applied for reinstatement, and Vincent happily obliged. In 1993, my parents visited Baltimore because Mike was getting married. I was the best man. It was the last time that James ever stepped foot in the city that best knew him as Black Bart. I told my parents that I preferred that they didn't fly up to Dayton for my graduation from law school because my friends and housemates had planned a wild going away road trip for me. To my surprise, my mom said, "Okay." I graduated in May 1994 and drove back home to Tampa. When my dad answered the door, I couldn't believe my eyes. James was wearing a robe and holding a catheter urine bag. He had been diagnosed with prostate cancer and was recovering from surgery. Steinbrenner referred him for a consult to the same doctor who treated General Norman Schwarzkopf. My mom said that they didn't tell me because they knew I was in the middle of my final exams and they didn't want me to worry. She said that during their time together, she had only seen my dad cry twice. First when his mother died, and then when he told her that he was afraid he was going to die without ever seeing me become a lawyer. Not only was the surgery completely successful, but James was able to miraculously beat cancer without ever losing his Florida suntan. Larry David began playing a recurring role as the voice of George Steinbrenner in the May 19th episode of Seinfeld called The Opposite. When George Costanza is introduced to the boss, he boldly tells him, "In the past 20 years, you've caused myself and the city of New York a good deal of distress as we have watched you take our beloved Yankees and reduce them to a laughingstock, all for the glorification of your massive ego." Steinbrenner replies, "Hire this man." James started watching Seinfeld every Thursday night after that episode. George is given the job as assistant to the traveling secretary on the show. I would tease my dad with, "Wasn't that the job Steinbrenner was going to give you with the Lightning?" There was no World Series that year because of the baseball strike. Instead, that October, my parents and I went to the movies and saw the film The Scout. In that movie, Albert Brooks played a down-on-his-luck major league scout who signs the greatest baseball phenom ever seen, an extremely neurotic Brendan Fraser, to a contract with the New York Yankees. James just had to see this movie because Steinbrenner played himself in it. My dad was disappointed because he thought George should have had a bigger role. After passing the bar exam, I took a job working for the public defender's office. I had my first jury trial on March 13, 1995. When I was picking the jury, sitting in the audience in the last row, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, was my dad. He was not going to miss this for the world. He was keeping an eye on me the same way he did the first time I went trick-or-treating with my friends when he tried his best to secretly follow me. He was more proud of me that day than he would have been if I were instead making my NHL debut. Many thought baseball's popularity would never recover after the World Series was canceled because of the strike. However, on September 6, 1995, Baltimore Orioles shortstop Cal Ripken Jr. played in his 2,131st consecutive game and broke Lou Gehrig's Ironman record, and America once again fell in love with the national pastime. March 1st, 1996 saw the opening of the largest spring training ballpark in Florida, Legends Field. Legends Field was built next to Tampa Stadium, the home of the Buccaneers, and replaced Fort Lauderdale as the spring training headquarters of the New York Yankees. Steinbrenner moved Yankees headquarters from Rocky Point to Legends Field. That summer, Legends Field had a series of concerts. Just like the Civic Center, we didn't need tickets. We just showed up and the ushers found us seats down front. We saw Sting, Natalie Merchant, Chicago, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Back at the Bay Harbor Inn, James also bounced several English guys from the hotel who he thought were trespassing vagrants. Actually, they were members of the band The Moody Blues, who we also saw at Legends Field that June, where they performed with the Florida Symphony Orchestra. When Legends Field opened, Joltin' Joe DiMaggio was easily the greatest living Yankee legend. On March 24th, the Yankee Clipper attended a game at the new sports venue as the special VIP guest of Steinbrenner. James picked up DiMaggio from the Tampa airport. In another example of green privilege, James was instructed to illegally park in front of the baggage claim area. If any pesky airport police officers ever told him to move the Cadillac, that was provided by Enterprise for this special occasion. James was supposed to tell him that he had special permission from the police captain to park in the no parking zone. Apparently, celebrities and the wealthy don't play by the same rules as the rest of us. James spent the entire day with him and never left his side. When they arrived at Legends Field, DiMaggio was a total gentleman and basically hung out with James the whole day and barely interacted with Steinbrenner. He even gave my dad an autographed photo that he signed for me, to Steve, best wishes, Joe DiMaggio. When it was time for him to leave, Joe embraced James in a big heartfelt hug, thanking him for everything. Glimpsing Steinbrenner across the room, Joe gave him a quick wave and said, "See ya, George." Afterwards, the Yankee owner was seething with jealousy. He told James, "I don't want you talking to my guests anymore." Joe DiMaggio passed away 3 years later. The Tampa Bay Lightning made the playoffs for the first time in their fourth season. They were facing the Philadelphia Flyers and Eric Lindros' feared Legion of Doom line. After splitting the first 2 games in Philly, where they won Game 2 in overtime, the Lightning played their first home playoff game in franchise history on April 21, 1996. It was the highest attended game in league history when more than 28,000 screaming fans packed the Thunderdome and saw Brian Bellows tie the game with less than 90 seconds left of regulation, and winger Alexander Selivanov scored the game winner in overtime to give the Bolts a 5-4 victory in Game 3. Unfortunately, we didn't go to that game, but my parents and I attended Game 4, where we sadly watched the Lightning go down 4-1. Tampa Bay would lose 3 straight games to the Flyers and were eliminated, despite the heroics of their star goaltender, Darren Poopa. On October 20th, 1996, James and Kelly watched the Tampa Bay Lightning defeat the New York Rangers 5-2 in the first game ever played at the team's new home, the Ice Palace, now known as Amalie Arena. A week later, the New York Yankees ended their 18-year drought when their first-year manager, Joe Torre, led the Bronx Bombers to their first World Series championship since 1978. Of course, James knew everybody on the team. He described the team captain, Bernie Williams, as the nicest guy. Everybody always asked James if they could get him a ball signed by Derek Jeter. My dad got Jeter to sign dozens of balls for him, but he always gave them all away, and he forgot to keep one for himself. When the team took a risk and signed Darryl Strawberry in July, he had tested positive for cocaine the previous season. James babysat the former Mets slugger when he was assigned to Tampa for training to make sure he stayed out of trouble. James said Darryl gave him no trouble at all. James hit fungos to Darryl and had fun shagging fly balls when Strawberry took batting practice at Legends Field prior to joining the Yankees. After the season was over, James was given a World Series championship ring by George Steinbrenner. On August 31, 1997, Diana, the 36-year-old Princess of Wales, was tragically killed in Paris when her intoxicated driver crashed the Mercedes while recklessly fleeing the following paparazzi. On October 6, 1997, the Yankees failed to repeat as champions when they were eliminated by the Cleveland Indians in 5 games in the American League Division Series. After the United States Supreme Court allowed Paula Jones's sexual assault lawsuit to proceed, President Bill Clinton denied having sex with Monica Lewinsky in a sworn deposition, and on January 26, 1998, he looked directly at the cameras and told the American people that he did not have sexual relations with that woman. On October 21, 1998, the Yankees swept the San Diego Padres in 4 straight games in the World Series. The team was one of the greatest clubs ever assembled, winning 114 games in the regular season. On December 19th, President Clinton became the second person in American history to be impeached when the House of Representatives voted to impeach him for lying about his blowjob in his deposition. On January 28, 1999, James collapsed in the parking lot at the hotel and was rushed to the emergency room. He was almost 68 years old and he had had a stroke. Now, it was a stroke to his cerebellum, the part of the brain that controls balance and motor movement. However, after a few weeks in the hospital, James had completely recovered. A few days after he came home, he was rollerblading around the neighborhood, and he actually changed the brake pads and oil on my car. On February 12, 1999, the Senate acquitted President Bill Clinton. On October 27, 1999, the Yankees repeated as world champions when they swept the Atlanta Braves in 4 straight. On December 2, 1999, James drove Jenny Steinbrenner to the Tampa Convention Center, where the City Council had an open hearing. Jenny wanted to speak out in favor of a city ordinance requiring exotic dancers to be at least 6 feet away from customers in strip clubs. Over 2,000 citizens attended the packed hearing while James waited outside by the car. Opposed to Jenny's position were First Amendment advocates. But was Jenny quoted by the newspaper? Hell no. But a reporter for the Tampa Tribune did approach James and ask for his opinion while he was waiting for the boss's daughter. James told the press that he thought the whole thing was silly.
Who cares what anybody else does? People are going to do what they want to do. Look at the president. He did what he wanted to do.
Unlike his very liberal wife and son, James wasn't political. Black Bart always played by his own rules. I would say he was pretty much a libertarian, even though he would have had no idea what that word meant. One day, I guess because of his association with Steinbrenner, he received in the mail a card from the Republican Party with his name engraved on it. Now, James absolutely loved to tease Kelly. When he showed it to her, she asked him, "Jimmy, where did you get that card?"
It came in the mail.
"Why did they send that to you?"
I must be a Republican.
"You can't be a Republican."
But it says I'm a Republican.
"You're a Canadian. You aren't even a citizen. You can't be a Republican."
But the card's got my name on it.
"That doesn't mean anything."
It says I'm a Republican. I must be a Republican.
Although James wasn't political at all and was anything but politically correct, he was pro-choice, pro-union, anti-war, and would have definitely voted Democrat if he were allowed to vote. Primarily because he would have voted for whoever Kelly told him to vote for. He always trusted her judgment on important things. On December 30th, 1999, a psychotic housekeeper at the Bay Harbor Inn went on a mass murdering killing spree, shooting and murdering 4 other hotel co-workers and a hotel guest while trying to escape. Fortunately, James was not one of the victims. James did actually meet a future president of the United States. Once James had to pick up Donald Trump from the airport, and he drove him to the horse farm in Ocala for Steinbrenner's birthday party. James remembered that Trump had a lot of luggage, and so he carried it in for him. But the billionaire was very different from the famous athletes and the snowbirds who stayed at the hotel. The ball players, celebrities, and the guests always would tip James. Trump never gave him a fucking dime. One of the job duties of James was to take Steinbrenner to the Tampa Bay Lightning games. Because Steinbrenner didn't have a luxury suite at the Thunderdome, the two of them would just sit next to each other at the games. George would send James to fetch the two of them hot dogs, and drunken fans would occasionally yell stuff at Steinbrenner, which would anger the boss when he was just trying to watch the hockey game. Steinbrenner was able to finally watch the games in peace and quiet when the Yankees obtained a luxury suite once the Lightning moved to the Ice Palace. James was Steinbrenner's hockey tutor when a subsidiary of the Yankees bought the New Jersey Devils in 2000. Bartlett had to explain everything about the game to him.
He'd take me up to the box with him. I had to show him everything. Why did the whistle blow when the puck went across the red line? That's a 2-line pass. What about when the whistle blew when it was touched up? That's icing. When he has other people in the box, he'd say to them, "Anything you want to know about the game, just ask James."
Even when Steinbrenner had guests in his suite at the hockey games, he normally either sat by himself or with James. Rich and powerful people like George may have known a lot of people, but they didn't really have many friends. Everybody had their hand out, everybody wanted something. At one of the Lightning games, James met the sports agent for Le Magnifique, Mario Lemieux. He told James that the next time he saw him, he would give him an autographed stick. James jokingly said that a jersey would be better. My dad was shocked when the next time he saw him, the agent gave him an autographed sweater from Super Mario himself. That October, the Bronx Bombers defeated the New York Mets in a 5-game Subway Series for a 3rd straight championship. The Yankees were the first team in baseball to three-peat since the Oakland A's did it in the early 70s. Unlike the Yankees, Steinbrenner never meddled with the affairs of the New Jersey Devils because he had deep respect for the team's president, Lou Lamoriello. I wonder if George knew that Lamoriello had been one of the instructors at the Jimmy Bartlett Hockey School in Providence 35 years earlier. The 2001 Yankees provided hope and inspiration for a city devastated by the attacks of September 11th. Unfortunately, on November 4th, 2001, the Yankees' attempt at a 4th straight championship fell short when the Arizona Diamondbacks' Luis Gonzalez got a bloop single over the head of Derek Jeter in the bottom of the 9th in Game 7 off of Mariano Rivera. George's daughter Jenny was married to Steve Swindle, who ran Steinbrenner's tugboat company before he joined the Yankees front office. Their son, who everybody called Little Stevie, was the apple of his famous grandfather's eye. Little Stevie loved ice hockey, and one of James's many duties was to teach Steinbrenner's grandson how to skate. Little Stevie used to call James Mr. Wilson because he reminded him of Mr. Wilson from Dennis the Menace. Because he was an old hockey player, James became Little Stevie's hero. After he gave him one of his New York Ranger hockey cards, the small child told him that he used to sleep with it under his pillow at night. The boss was overwhelmed with envy whenever Little Stevie would sing the praises of Mr. Wilson. This child would one day inherit billions of dollars and the New York Yankees. But at that time, his most prized possession was a simple Jimmy Bartlett bubblegum card. On January 6, 2003, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led by Hall of Famers Derek Brooks, Warren Sapp, John Lynch, and Rondé Barber, defeated the Oakland Raiders 48-21 to win Super Bowl 37. In December, the 73-year-old George Steinbrenner collapsed at the memorial service for the Hall of Fame Cleveland Browns quarterback Otto Graham. He fainted, hitting his head on a folded chair, and landed face down on the ground. He was rushed to the hospital. Although he recovered, it was obvious that George Steinbrenner's health was in decline. On June 7, 2004, Ruslan Fedotenko scored both of his team's goals as the Tampa Bay Lightning defeated the Calgary Flames 2-1 in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. The closest James ever came to winning the Stanley Cup was in 1955 when his Montreal Canadiens lost Game 7 to Gordie Howe's Detroit Red Wings. He finally got to touch the historic trophy for the first time when the Lightning put it on display at the Ice Palace. In June 2005, my wife Donnell and I took a cruise out of Tampa. Did you notice how I slipped that in? Yeah, I actually was able to convince someone to marry my sorry ass. Anyway, my dad gave us a ride and dropped us off at the port of Tampa. He was 73 years old, and my wife only knew him as her easygoing father-in-law. You know, he was the one who installed our toilet in our house because I didn't know how to do it guy, not the hockey player with the quick-triggered temper. My wife and I were in the back seat, and James was pointing out to us where our ship was departing.
If you look over there, that's where the cruise ships come in, and
all of a sudden, time stood still. One of the porters accidentally touched the passenger side door of my dad's car with a luggage cart. When I say he barely touched the car, I mean he barely touched the car. Didn't even come close to leaving a scratch. But that didn't matter. Bartlett, in one rapid fluid motion, put the car in park with his right hand, while simultaneously opening his car door with his left hand. Before any of us could process what was happening, Bartlett had hawked up and was already out of the car and halfway across the hood, ready to pulverize the negligent baggage carrier. Somehow, I was able to get out and restrain my dad from behind. The cops were already walking over. "Don't fucking hold me back." He was beet red, veins throbbing. "Dad, if you touch the guy, they're going to arrest you, and then you're going to get deported back to Canada." A second later, he was back in the car, completely back to normal. He immediately resumed playing tour guide.
"So when the ships come in, you can tell which one it is by..."
My wife was in shock and speechless as we boarded our ship. George Steinbrenner was indeed a Yankee Doodle dandy. He literally was born on the 4th of July. The first time I met Steinbrenner was on a boat in Tampa Bay where we watched the Independence Day fireworks. Of course it was catered. My dad and I must have eaten 10 pounds of jumbo shrimp. When I met Steinbrenner, he shook my hand and said, "Glad to see ya." I thought this greeting was clever. It was all purpose. He could say it to somebody he met for the first time or the 100th time, whether he remembered you or not. Steinbrenner's memory also began to decline with his health as he got older. One day, Steinbrenner was furious when James didn't show up to pick him up at the airport. "I don't want James driving me anymore." But George had forgotten that James was on vacation. He was on a cruise with Kelly. But everyone was afraid to tell him the truth. So James was now on Steinbrenner's shit list. He wasn't fired. He still had to run all the errands. He just was getting punished so he wasn't allowed to be in the boss's presence anymore, at least temporarily. Steinbrenner also refused to give James any more World Series championship rings. George later realized that James had done nothing wrong, but he was too stubborn to ever admit to making a mistake. In his final years, Steinbrenner became wheelchair-bound and he appeared in public less frequently. In 2005, George Steinbrenner sold the Bay Harbor Inn. he named his son-in-law Steve Swindle to be his successor. However, after Jenny divorced him in 2007, Hal Steinbrenner actually took over as the leader of the New York Yankees. On November 4, 2009, the Yankees under new manager Joe Girardi beat the Philadelphia Phillies in 6 games for their 27th World Championship. Hal Steinbrenner made sure to take care of James, and he gave him a 2009 World Series ring, which James would wear with pride for the rest of his life. He valued that ring more than anything else he ever owned, even more than little Stevie valued his bubblegum card. The 14-karat gold ring produced by Balfour contained 119 diamonds. On the one side of the ring, it featured Yankee Stadium. On the right side, it featured the name of the hockey player turned Southern Yankee, Bartlett. Legends Field was later renamed George M Steinbrenner Field. It's possible that one day, someone digging around through a cluttered desk drawer in an office at Steinbrenner Field might find some old World Series rings in the back of a drawer or in a closet with the name Bartlett engraved on them. James was in his late 70s when he finally retired. On July 13, 2010, it was the end of an era when George Steinbrenner died on the day of the All-Star Game.